right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we are talking about Jeff Nichols' The Bike Rider, which is a movie that's been on my most anticipated movies of the year list for me for well over a year now. It kept getting delayed for various reasons, and so happy that we finally got to see it. We're finally getting to talk about it, and well, I was a little disappointed. Overall, I did like it, but we get into a lot of stuff here in the conversation. Joining me, we've got Jason Harris from Awesome Movie Year. We get into some good stuff on here, some good puzzle pieces, and yeah, it was a fun one to get into. So that's coming up in a second. Before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. And with that said, let's just get into it. Let's talk about the Bikeriders. Jason Harris is with us to talk about Jeff Nichols' The Bikeriders. How's it going, Jason?
I want to start a podcast club.
I thought it would be a little squeakier, the voice.
And Tom Hardy is.
Yeah. Hey, I want to start a bike club.
That's it. That's it. That's our days. That's it.
It would be so much more fun to just not do puzzle pieces and just do that for like next 30 minutes. I'm down. Jason, are you a big Jeff Nichols fan? Let's get into this before, because I don't know if we've talked that much Jeff Nichols before.
We like Jeff Nichols. Everyone likes Jeff Nichols, right?
I do. So, I do. I was really looking forward to this movie. So
yeah, I mean, look, when it's you right away know, like, hey, Jeff Nichols, we gotta go see this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're talking, bikers, we're talking gangs, the American dream a little bit in here. I don't know. I think we'll get into some interesting stuff. Let's just start jumping into it. What do you have for your first puzzle piece?
Well, Dave, should we knock out the ones that they actually referenced in the movie that I think I referenced on our trailer episode last month anyway?
Yeah, I mean, well, you know what? I think we should start with Goodfellas, quite frankly. I mean, everybody else is saying it in their reviews. I mean, they're practically calling it Bikefellas.
It's interesting, and I know why they're doing that. A lot of that is because of the, there was Squeaky Magoo and, Johnny Filth, or whatever. Yeah. So I think that was really where that comes from, that, and obviously the soundtrack is like, we're just needle dropping Scorsese. But I think a more accurate Scorsese, depiction would have been Mean Streets, because this isn't like a giant heist or crime movie, as in Goodfellas, where these guys are big gangsters. This is like really more of that kind of small petty crime stuff for most of the movie, right? And it's about a group of kind of outsiders who need to find a home, and they find it with each other. So I thought that camaraderie and everything reminded me much more of Mean Streets than it did of Goodfellas.
Interesting. Yeah. And, I've said this before on the show, and I still haven't done it. I've never seen Mean Streets. It's like a big blind spot for me, and I'm really looking forward to watching it. So I can't really comment on that too much, but I mean, just back to Goodfellas, that whole camaraderie, the tough guys, all that stuff, the new member joining up. I mean, you could see a lot of the reasons why people bring that up, but yeah, sure. I think you're right though. This is definitely a lot less plot heavy and a lot more just about the guys, the fellas.
So, the Mean Streets, there's, a ton of it takes place in their like hangout bar also, right? So, not to say there aren't scenes like that in Goodfellas. I mean, obviously we know that, they have their own hangout bar, but this feels a lot more of that kind of, like I said, lower rung type thing. Dave, what did you think of the structure of this movie? Because I think some people like that really, I thought, hampered the movie for me. It's all based on the spine is, this guy took pictures and interviews for about 7 years, and they used that as the spine of the movie. To me, it worked against it because they really didn't need a plot. It was just like, so what happened after Billy left? And now we can go to that episode. And then it's like, so then you guys got married, you and Benny. What was that like? And it was just, it felt like a really, I understand why you did it, but And I'm not calling it lazy, but it made it seem lazy to me.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. Like, I don't feel like it went anywhere. Like, it was just there just for the sake of a structure, other than it just being a hangout movie, kind of. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, nothing really goes anywhere. And yeah, I mean, I guess I might as well just throw this out there right now. In that way, it kind of reminded me of Dazed and Confused, just a different kind of setting of that era. But just, people, you get the idea of the whole gang. You get an idea of all the people that hang out, all the various people on the sides that are trying to make their way in, the people that are just there for the night and then just kind of disappear, the new guys who show up. It's just kind of a vibe and a setting of different people hanging out, and I think that is kind of the weak point of this movie, in that it doesn't really have too much plot. Normally I'm cool with that. Like, Dazed and Confused is great. I brought up Dazed and Confused like for just a totally unrelated thing, but like Licorice Pizza, I mentioned that as a puzzle piece on that episode. So I'm down for that kind of movie. I think this movie, though, it just made me want there to be something that it was building towards more.
Yep, 100%. I love hangout movies, but this one I didn't think did it. If this was a short film, what would you have lost, right?
Sure, sure.
So
Well, let's go to another piece. What do you got next?
yeah. So I mean, look, talking about that structure, Dave. The structure, I think, and I realized this story wasn't following the writer, but I feel like if you look at Almost Famous, which does
Mm.
follow the writer, and kind of encapsulates all the characters around him, I thought that was done in a much more effective way than this one. So I'm going to go with Almost Famous,
That
Dave.
that is an interesting one. Yeah, and you know what? You're absolutely right, because that whole wraparound story of getting the story would have worked so much better if he was more of an active participant in everything that's going on, instead of just like, oh, there he is, he's sitting on the car with a microphone.
Right. There's even the scene where the guy says, we had this photographer ride with us for all these years, but we never see him ride. We never see him interact with anyone but Jodie Comer,
Yeah,
really. So, a little bit, but like, yeah, he's a device. He's not a character, right?
yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned it earlier about some of the stuff that's actually on screen. We might as well bring up the wild one. And my favorite thing about the movie really is the implication that Tom Hardy's character is basically just kind of posturing and like creating his image off of watching Brando. And I think that is really interesting. I wish it went even deeper into that, and kind of seeing that, like, these guys who were kind of building their whole lifestyle around this facade, some of them were like just straight up taking it off of movies. And I think that's really cool and interesting as a way to make a movie. I wish it went into that deeper.
I think that's a really good point because, you're talking about the Tom Hardy character. What really can you tell me about him other than he had a family and he wanted to start a bike club? Like, you don't know anything about this guy, right? Like,
Right.
and I could probably say that about all the characters, the Benny character and this and that, the Austin Butler character, which also was a strange way to open the movie because the way they open it is kind of this scene where he refuses to take his colors off, his, biker colors off, and he gets into this fight and gets his ass kicked. So you think like, oh, this is his movie. This is the guy, but it's really, as much Tom Hardy's movie and Jodie Comer's movie as his movie. So again, I think there's a little kind of confusion with the way it goes and everything. You mentioned the wild one, the Brando movie. Obviously, we covered on Awesome Movie Year. Easy Rider is also referenced in this movie, which I had
Sure.
mentioned on the preview episode. So we got to throw them both out there together since they're both literally in this movie. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, talking about Tom Hardy's character, you could also, as we started the episode, we could talk about his funny voice. I think he's great in this movie. As good as Austin Butler is, and he does like radiate movie star presence in this movie, I think really Tom Hardy is the standout here.
I agree. I was quite fascinated just watching him, So
Yeah.
I'll just say that, like, whether you like it or not, it's like, hey, it's an interesting performance, if nothing else.
Very much so. Very much so. What do you got next?
Well, Dave, you want to talk about we've now talked about hangout movies and we've talked about great needle drop movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the element of the open road and racing, American Graffiti. This is,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of like last bit of camaraderie. All these elements, which I think American Graffiti is a much better movie than this, but like all these elements that are percolating really kind of bubble to the top in a great way in American Graffiti.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, that kind of goes back to the Dazed and Confused as well. Like, that same kind of thing of just capturing the vibe of a certain moment in time and specifically a moment in time in America. So, yeah, I mean, all three kind of that's
Right.
the main goal of all three of those movies. So, yeah, definitely a good one to include here. I will go, you got American Graffiti in there. I'm going to go to American History X. A much darker movie. But, obviously neo Nazis were worse than bikers. But, these guys are, pretty much bad people, like a world of violence, misogyny, crime. And we're kind of being set up to care about these characters. And in that way, it kind of reminded me of that same kind of thing where they're trying to make you care about this new guy making his way in and whether or not he's going to be like the number two to the main guy and to the ringleader, whether he might be taking over at some point. It really reminded me a lot of the way Edward Furlong kind of like is making his way in and befriending Edward Norton. And then how some of the new young guys just take everything they've built and just make it way, way worse. Which, of course, it was bad to begin with American History X, but making it even worse.
Yeah, I had pieces on my list that cover those points as well. And I thought, that young guy who wants to get in and, doesn't pass the test, right? You're like, where this is going, right? And so if you've ever watched Boardwalk Empire, the ending of Boardwalk Empire is literally this, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I had that for that piece. And then I also put down Blow, which is, you could pick any movie about guy starts off as small time X and gets out of hand, right? So I picked Blow. Hey, we're bringing cocaine in, it's cool, and then it gets out of control, and now everything's messed up, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Once you start with the illegal shit, that's at first they're just a couple of guys riding bikes. They're drinking some beers, but
yeah, and for them, I'm not gonna defend it, but like you're talking about the crime element, all the crime that they commit here for until those like that the circle turns at the end is like, oh, well, these guys beat up our guy, so we have to get him back, right?
yeah.
It's not like crime for the sake of committing crime. They're bike riders, they're not criminals.
Which, by the way, to that point, you were just talking about, like, can you tell me anything about Tom Hardy's character? Like, what do these people do for work if they're
Well, he
not
was a
doing
truck
violent
driver.
crime?
I remember they said he's a truck driver, right?
That's true. He's a truck driver. No one else
Right.
seems to have jobs.
Yeah, and the Benny character we know is a mechanic of sorts, but who knows what any of the rest of them do.
Yeah. Well, my next one actually kind of speaks to Claire Foy's character. Or, I'm sorry. My next one speaks to Jodie Comer's character because I kept thinking of Claire Foy in First Man when she, yells out, "They're just a bunch of boys playing with their toys." And it reminded me of that, like where she's just like, she just can't stand her husband or any of his friends and just everything that they're up to constantly. But she really, there's nothing she could do to stop it. Like these are driven people who are just going to do what they're going to do. And it reminded me a lot, even though obviously a bunch of bikers is a very different setting than a bunch of, scientist astronauts. But that whole relationship though of them just being completely into their thing with their fellas, and the wives at home just being like, oh, these fucking guys.
Yeah, didn't you that's what you refer to as the good old days, right, Dave?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Back when
Uh,
we used to be able to do that.
yeah, when men were men and women
Hmm.
were at home, right,
Yep.
Dave? So
Yep.
yeah, you
Absolutely.
love
That's
that
me.
stuff, Dave.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Dave, I want to stick with Linkletter here
Mm.
because we're talking about the structure and this kind of listing off things that have been done and everything. And you've mentioned First Man, so I'm going to go with another space movie, which I think did it much better. Apollo 10 and a half, which is
Mm.
on Netflix and nobody knows about. But I thought that
No,
was
they
a
don't.
way better version of like, hey, and then this happened, and then this happened, and wasn't this a crazy time? Like, that movie to me should have never worked, but that was Linklater at his best, like showing such a deft hand. So I thought that's a much better example of something like this and how to make it work.
That's a good point, and I hate to do this because I literally just did it on our Daddy-O episode, but I'm going to do it again and just go right along with your one Linklater movie that's stuck on Netflix and not as many people are going to see it, and go right to another one, which is his most recent movie, Hitman, which obviously too new
I
to
feel like
actually
everyone's seeing that on
I don't
Netflix,
know. I feel like everyone in our movie nerd circle are, but I don't know if like average audiences are, but maybe they are. It's so hard to tell with Netflix, but regardless, I think the idea of like creating a persona for yourself, like in that, we're talking about it with Tom Hardy's character, but really with just anyone who joins up in this club, that's what they're there for. They want to just be this persona that they want to kind of live and put into the world. They just don't want to be normal, and that kind of is the main thing with Hitman is that, at the end of the day, that's what's going on here. These people are making a persona for themselves.
Who wants to be normal, Dave? That sounds so
Yeah.
boring. I mean,
I like being normal, to be honest.
I mean, but are you really that normal? I mean, I know you're normal in some ways, but again, you work at a family-owned record store, you podcast and you write sound, music all the time. You're podcasting, you're helping your wife out. It's not like you have a traditional 9 to 5. You come home and you're a meat and
Yeah,
potatoes guy, because that's not keto. But
I do like meat, though.
I know you do.
But
The steakies, Dave. So
the
I don't know. I mean,
steakies.
I know you have a more normal life than I do. I'll give you that. But I don't want
Yeah,
a normal life. That has no appeal to me, Dave.
yeah,
Look, I'm gonna kind of ref off of the point you just made and about fitting in, and I'm looking at these outfits and kind of the street grittiness. Man, I thought of the Warriors while I
yeah.
was watching this thing, and I love the Warriors, Walter Hill, and just kind of the identification of the outfits and everything. So the Warriors is a movie you should watch if you've never seen it, and if you haven't, what are you doing? But definitely an influence here, I'd say.
Yeah, the Warriors is another one that was on my list as well. And yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about how the wraparound story of the guy getting the story of this gang, maybe isn't the best entry point. I think seeing more of the other gangs would have maybe been a better way to do it, because we do see little bits and pieces of them, and then but mainly it's the new guys that are joining up who we're seeing into this
Right.
one gang. So I would have loved to see more of the different gangs.
And all those conflicts are like literally one scene conflicts, not,
Yeah.
even when they kick that young kid out, like, it's like, okay, well, that's now settled in the next time we see him. So.
Yeah. 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 Well, I only have one more piece here. It's just a little one, but I was thinking of the Chappelle Show sketch when keeping it real goes wrong. Because that's what these guys do. They have to just keep up that facade and be as tough as possible, even though it gets them in trouble constantly, and eventually gets them killed.
Yeah. Look, we're all for Dave Chappelle references here.
Yeah.
I'll throw one out, Dave, that we covered on Awesome Movie Year. I'm going to throw it out, one, because again, like the colors and the motorcycle riding, but two, because I'm going to compare Tom Hardy to Michael Paré in Streets of Fire.
Oh, hell yeah. Why not? This
Yeah.
movie needed musical sequences. That's what it needed.
I mean, there were so many good mic drops. I really love the soundtrack on this thing, but
Yeah.
yeah, so I'll go there, and I'll leave it at that for you, Dave.
There you go. There you go. I think we got a good list here. Let's read down the list. We'll get into some closing thoughts. We talked about, of course, starting it off with some Scorsese. We had Goodfellas and Mean Streets. Then we got to Dazed and Confused, Almost Famous, The Wild One, Easy Rider, American Graffiti, American History X, Boardwalk Empire, Blow, First Man, Apollo 10 and a Half, Hitman, The Warriors, the Dave Chappelle When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong sketch, and Streets of Fire. Yeah, I mean, I think we got an interesting list here, and like pretty clearly, we were both mixed on this movie. I think it's pretty obviously the weakest Jeff Nichols movie, but I think that there's enough in the performances, at least, that make the movie worthwhile, as far as I'm
I still want
concerned.
to watch whatever Jeff Nichols puts out there. I think
Oh
again,
yeah,
I think the adherence to like, oh, we actually found the photos, and we're going to use this as the structural backbone was the mistake here. And I mean, I can't see anyone being like reading this script and being like, you really nailed the conflict,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but Dave, let me ask you, I mean, hangout movies we both love. You got any others you wanna throw out there?
Um, damn, that's a good question.
How about I'll vamp for you for a minute. How about
Yeah.
one that we covered on Awesome Movie Year, I Vitalone, which I think also you could reference in comparison to this.
Yeah, that was a really cool movie. I think that would be a good one. What about Friday?
Yep.
Friday is a really good one. Also Clerks to keep it in that same 90s era.
Yeah, I think you can really look at a lot of those 90s indies that we all love, and I love Trees Lounge, and that's really set in a bar with all these like kind of characters who aren't living up to whatever they could, but like find kind of truth with each other. True Love, which I reference on this show, which we covered in our 1989 season. Lots of good neighborhood movies, bro.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that does it for the Bike Riders. Jason, is there another movie you watched recently you want to recommend to our listeners?
Dave, did you watch Bratz, the Brat Pack documentary?
I heard some people loved it and some people just absolutely hated it for some reason. I don't really know why exactly.
Yeah, so I'm not recommending it based on like it being awesome because it's not. I know what the flaws are when I watch that movie, but it's such a fascinating piece of pop culture that obviously still lives on. I mean, literally, I saw them talking about like maybe it's time to reboot, Breakfast Club and stuff like this. So I like it just because I think it's still so relevant, right? It's that generation, that stuff lives on. I would recommend it just if we grew up in the '80s, like you got to watch that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be a fun one for me to get to sometime soon. But yeah, Jason, thanks so much for being here. Tell people where they can find Awesome Movie Year and your comedy and everything else you're up to.
Yeah, awesome movie year. You know where to find it. Hopefully, you're subscribed and voting on our audience choice episode. Hey, High Fidelity is one of those choices, and Almost
Hmm.
Famous is one of those choices. High Fidelity, a great hangout movie.
There you
Almost
go.
Famous, a movie that we referenced right here, right? So
Yeah.
we're
And
finishing.
Duets, a movie that's not going to win.
That's fine, and I'm fine with that. So that's what's going on. Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy. I'll be at Notoriety July 5th and 6th. And then I have Eat This Comedy at Echo and Rig. Dave, you're going to be there just to eat steak and not watch me
Hmm.
at July 28th, and more in the works, I hope.
What would you do if I showed up and got my food to go? And then
I would dap you up for that, dude. That's pretty
Nice.
great. I like a
Nice.
good prank. So,
Yeah, right on. Jason, thanks so much for being here. We'll get you back again soon.
all right.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about the Bike Riders. Thank you to Jason Harris for joining me on that one, and thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you're subscribed. We've got a lot of episodes on the way right now, and if you're subscribed, you'll find out about them as soon as they come out. You could do that, of course, on any of the podcast apps, wherever you're listening right now. Also, if where you're listening right now happens to have a 5-star button that you can click on, do that. That'll help make sure that more people check out the show, and that would be very much appreciated. You can also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, join our Facebook group Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, and don't forget about our Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year, that's Jason's podcast, and from my music career. Lots of great stuff over there. It's patreon.com/bydavidrosen. Check it out. Also, one other thing, I always love hearing from my listeners, so if you thought of any puzzle pieces for the Bike Riders or any of the movies that we cover on this show, anything that we didn't mention in the episode, please send them in. You can do that, on all the socials. You can email me in the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces group. I'd love to hear from you. I will read your puzzle pieces on the next trailers episode, and it would just be awesome to hear from you. Also, maybe we'll even get you on an episode sometime if you'd ever like to do that. Just get in touch. I love hearing from the listeners. And with that said, let's close this out with a piece of music like I always do. And I feel like I gotta do something bike rider related, something motorcycle related. What should I play for this one? You know what? For this one, I'm going to actually go with a track called Forgotten from my album An Unseen Sky. I always felt like this track kind of had the vibe of like just kind of like riding on like an open road kind of a thing. So that feels like it could fit really well here with the Bikeriders. I could see driving on a motorcycle and listening to this track. So let's go with this. Again, it's called Forgotten. It's from my second album, An Unseen Sky. I hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.